to communicate with the dead, with spirits, with whatever we want to call it. We tend to go and kind of gamify that automatically. Pendulum dowsing in things like OuijaBoards, all of which were originally games, parlor games, and we can see that also in things like tarot, which of course was designed to be a game originally. All of these things are games, right? And they're just games that we found give us some sort of random feedback, and enough random feedback in order for us to be able to interpret that as communication from spirits. Download it, turn it on your computer, and just let it run. Okay, that's all it does. I've done the calculations, and the amount of time it would take to see the same combination of words and letters is about 10 times the age of our universe. There's a long way to go with it, like every piece of software that's ever been invented. SpectraDOS comes up with stuff that's really quite interesting, that I can interpret to have relevance to where I am or what I'm doing at the time. And it doesn't do that rarely, it does that repeatedly. A program that behaves in a way that even the programmer does not expect. I need to underline that this is not AI. This is not artificial intelligence generating. It doesn't need an interface, because if I'm thinking of a problem, and I think that's kind of the interface, is that in my mind I'm focusing on an issue. The random words seem to make sense associated with that issue. But also the letters are put together under a mathematical rule. So they should, in theory, spell words from lots of different languages. I've seen Jin once, is that we should be able to program something that we don't fully understand. And SpectraDOS is kind of the first step towards that. So yeah, I'm Dr. Andrew Wedgbury. I'm a games design lecturer. For my sins means I play with games all day, which is probably the best job in the world, to be honest with you. And I get to make games. I get to think about how important games are to people. And it turns out that games have been really important to us for a very long time. So yeah, I am part of, just to give you some background, I'm a sociologist who's found myself drifting into games design. And I work for Staffordshire University. The University of Staffordshire. I'll get told off for saying Staffordshire University. And I work for the University of Staffordshire in their games department, which is one of the biggest games in the country. And yeah, I'm the weird guy there. So if you just go to Staffordshire University and ask for the weird guy, then I'll point you directly to me. So I'm going to talk today about a little program that I've been working on for a while, and you do have the opportunity of using this. I'll put a link at some point towards the end in the chat for people that want to download this. It is, I kind of lovingly call it SpectraDOS. Let me just try and share my screen, because last time I managed to not share my screen for ages and it became a problem. Can you guys see that?
Yes, we can see that fine.
Good. Okay. So what's SpectraDOS? So SpectraDOS kind of follows on a tradition of, I suppose, quite a long tradition of using games to communicate with other forces. Okay, and so there's a really good book which I'm just reaching to get to show you in case you're interested, which is called Games of the Gods, which is back to front, of course, because it's on the camera. It's a book by Nigel Pennick. It's a really good book, and it was kind of the inspiration for me to get started on this kind of journey. And the whole point of this is that when we think about the ways that we try to communicate with the dead, with spirits, with whatever we want to call it, we tend to go and kind of gamify that automatically. And that can be seen in things like pendulum dowsing, in things like OuijaBoards, all of which were originally games, parlor games or spiritual games. And we can see that also in things like tarot, which of course was designed to be a game originally, playing card divination. All of these things are games, right? And they're just games that we found give us some sort of random feedback, and enough random feedback in order for us to be able to interpret that as communication from spirits. My claim here is not to say that that is or isn't a communication from spirits, because that's the wonderful thing about this world, right? Is we don't know. Yeah, we think it is, and it feels like it is. And as long as we're happy that it is, then it is, okay? So I'm not making any claims for SpectraDOS. I'm not making any claims for OuijaBoards. I'm not making any claims for dowsing either. Right. Move to the next slide. So the question I kind of asked myself, as well as working on gamifying haunted places and the whole idea of the plaque system to kind of mark those haunted places, I'm really interested in if I can haunt a machine, and is that possible to do realistically, believably, and in a way that I can't control. So a lot of people will say that, you could just do that with AI, and yes, you could, but what AI will do is it will use a large lexicon of language, and it will come up with something human readable that is not open to interpretation, really. And that's the difficult bit, is that AI is AI, and therefore we know it's AI. It's not a spirit, it is AI, and that's what it's doing. It's coming up with an algorithmic way of answering our questions. So I go back to how games or methods like this were originally used to communicate with spirits. They use things like subtle movements, boards as channels, so ways to kind of link you to the world. The voice is in static, okay? So we have EVP, which is audible voices, audible words, which emerge from quite often staticky type sounds. And then there's this idea that I had of haunting through code. And that's kind of what I've been working towards, and that's kind of what SpectraDOS does. And yeah, so that's what I'm going to talk about today, is exactly what SpectraDOS is. And then what I'd really love to do is to ask you guys to go away, download it. I promise you there's no viruses there. I've done a lot of testing. Download it, turn it on your computer, and just let it run, okay? That's all it does, is it just runs. And I will try and demonstrate it today whilst we're talking. But all it does is just run, and you just watch, and you just try and interpret what comes up, okay? So let's just move on a little bit. So in order to make SpectraDOS, I had to ask myself a few questions, okay? What do haunted systems do? And haunted systems is something I work in quite a lot. The idea of a haunted system to me is something that emerges without the programmer's intention, without an AI intention, but just seems to emerge of its own accord out of the blue. And it does happen, and it is possible to set these things up, often with random events. Random events are linked via a chain in order to create something that feels haunted, or even simply the space within the game can feel haunted, because a lot of the time the architecture of the space we're in is what actually sets us up to be scared, sets us up to feel that there's a presence, and sets up for potentially, arguably by many hauntologists, the potential for a presence to be in a space. It's the architecture and the shape of the room. You can see things like feng shui in Eastern culture also believe this. I believe in the layout of a room really affects the way that the spirit moves within that room. So haunted systems then, we've got some rules. They act on their own. They resist prediction, so they can't be predicted. It's not an AI where you can put in a question and it gives you an answer, which is predictable. They invite interpretation, and they need to feel alive on their own without input. Okay, so this is what I perceive as a haunted system. Sorry, I've gone back. And so I suppose I can come on to just literally talking briefly about what SpectraDOS itself does. SpectraDOS, as you can imagine, DOS is probably one of the earlier computing systems. It's called a disk operating system, is what it stands for. And SpectraDOS is designed to look a bit like it, and that's how the name came about. So it's a spectral disk operating system, then, if you like. And it is a game, a zero-player game that you simply run and watch. And zero-player games are rare, but they're not unheard of. And so they simply run the game, you watch the game, and it will give you information. It'll give you words, it'll give you sentences that look a lot like gibberish, but if you look closely, they have deeper meaning to them, and they're easy to put together. And that's done through an algorithm that understands how sentences are put together, and then those words are picked randomly, computationally. Of course, I think an important thing to mention here, and why this could be seen as on the same league as other more traditional spiritual practices, is that nothing in a computer is really random. It's pseudo-random, okay? So when we run a computer system over and over again, we would probably get similar results. And so this is how you could argue that the things that come through SpectraDOS are in somehow influenceable by outside forces, by paranormal forces, if you like, or just by your personal force within the space. I'm not quite sure how that works. What I do know is that quite often SpectraDOS comes up with stuff that's really quite interesting that I can interpret to have relevance to where I am or what I'm doing at the time. And it doesn't do that rarely, it does that repeatedly, but it takes a little bit of interpretation, like any other form of divination or seance or Ouija board session. So when SpectraDOS starts, it boots like an old machine, like an old DOS machine. It streams words, glitches, and symbols. And the symbols it streams are to do with alchemy, and they add an extra layer of interpretation to it, I feel. It also streams line numbers for each line that it comes up with. I'm hoping that in the future those lines will be recordable. At the moment, in the first version of SpectraDOS, there's no way of recording apart from with a pen and paper, so you kind of really need to watch and see what comes up. But in future versions, it will be recordable, and it'll generate a text document for you, and you'll be able to go back over a long text document. So in theory, I suppose you could turn your laptop or iPad or tablet or whatever on in a haunted location and leave SpectraDOS running, and then go back to see what came up throughout the night. That would be quite an interesting experiment for it. And it comes up with words in fragments which feel uncanny. They feel like they mean something, but there's something wrong with them. They're not clear. They're not filtered. They're fragments of information that kind of make sense to your brain then. And I think in order for them to make full sense to your brain, you need to be in the situation. So the reason that SpectraDOS, when I'm sitting watching it, makes sense to me is perhaps because I'm interpreting what I see and linking it to things in my world, or we link it to things in our space. And I think that's why SpectraDOS can sometimes really feel like it's speaking to us. And sometimes, very, very rarely, like national lottery winning chances rarely, it comes up with really clear voice, which is a really specific message for a specific person. That's not happened yet, but if it does happen whilst you're using it, please let me know, because it's programmed to happen really. But I don't exactly know what it looks like, because it's never happened to me, because I've programmed it to do something that basically never happens. Okay? So this is just a one run through of SpectraDOS, and it was done today whilst I was thinking and putting together this PowerPoint and thinking about what we could do or what might happen. And so we came up with a few phrases in that, what looks like a mix. So you can see here, you can see the line numbers. I don't know if you can see my mouse pointer, but there's line numbers. There are alchemical symbols associated with each one. So air and earth are the ones I recognize. Mercury. Okay, and so those symbols have a kind of weighting that perhaps help you interpret furthermore what the actual words mean. And so we got a few things that came up interesting. Bear in mind, I was thinking about telling you guys about SpectraDOS and how it communicates or has the potential of communicating with what might be another side. And obviously when we program something like this, we leave that completely open to interpretation. And it came up with things like grave open. So it's like, I'm talking about how SpectraDOS can interpret such things. Spectre me. So it's talking about itself being a spectre here, quite interestingly. Stay among shadows. Okay, so really, if I wanted to interpret that, we could say that SpectraDOS is a way to keep the kind of life of the spirit world alive. And it came up with this after image stumble in absence of track. So in other words, it has no control. It's telling me, or I interpreted that as it's telling me that it has no control over these words, but the image is because it stumbles in the absence of that control. It generates meaning in the absence of meaning, which is absolutely what hauntology, what my specialist area of interest is about, the presence of something being absent. Okay, you can look at the words along with their meaning, which often Mercury is associated with individual meaning, individual people. I believe that somebody might be able to correct me, but then we've got grave open associated with that. And again, a lot of this has come up with individual meaning, so about it, okay? So it is stumbling in the absence of truth. So it's really quite interesting things that come out. Well, you can see there that there's a lot of what looks like gobbledygook, but because that looked like gobbledygook to me doesn't mean it's going to look like that to you. And I imagine one or two people may see things there. School talk, game, linger. Okay, so it's about a game that lingers, I could interpret it as. And it's about interpreting what you see as being communication. And I think that's the kind of power of this system, is that it kind of works as the medium, in that it gives you information that you then have to interpret the meaning from. And that's common across many forms of divination, common across many forms of mediumship. Many traditions all have this kind of what feels like a complete abstractness, but which, when analysed, gives deeper meaning. If you want to really look at a really powerful example of that, you need to look at something like the I Ching, which has passages that mean nonsense, but have a deeper meaning when the individual reads it. So it becomes meaningful to you as you read it. So what does it do? And how does it kind of do that? So all these are the things that I had in mind when I was inventing SpectraDOS. The OuijaBoard was one of my main inspirations, and it does the same. It turns letters into words. It gives us often random letters, often really deep and meaningful sentences, sometimes interpretable sentences. And that's exactly what the OuijaBoard does. Yeah, it helps us turn what we see on the board into a deeper meaning. I was thinking about EVP and that idea of fragments in the static, and how that helps us understand, or how we can interpret those fragments to understand the meanings of words. Pendulums and that kind of subtle drift and kind of indication of truth and false. And so SpectraDOS, in other words, generates a digital seance that we can then interpret. And I imagine if SpectraDOS keeps on getting developed, there'll be people that specialize in interpreting it. And that's okay, because that will be really the kind of ultimate success of a computer game or computer program that does this particular task. And we can see that there are specialists in interpreting different kinds of symbols in many cultures, and why should that not ever be digital? So the question really is, why does it feel haunted? And SpectraDOS feels haunted because it's ambiguous, and that's what makes a haunting. Okay, so scientists know that ambiguous space and ambiguous meaning makes things feel genuinely haunted. And it's because we don't quite it's because we feel like we know what is happening, but we don't quite understand what is happening. It's like the uncanny. When we see a face that's not quite right, we can recognize it as a face. We can recognize it as a human being, but we might not be able to quite put our finger on why it's not quite right, or why we don't quite understand it. And SpectraDOS does the same kind of thing. It gives us words. It gives us words that are mathematically sometimes in the correct order, but we have no idea what those words are going to be or what meaning they're going to give to us. And I think that's why it feels haunted as a software program. And we have to remember as well, I will do a demonstration of it in a moment. We have to remember that this is a very early on program. It's version 0.0.1 is what I'm calling it. And I think as we go forward, and I'd really like to kind of reach out to people in ASSAP to test it out and let me know about their experiences. Because as we go forward, SpectraDOS is going to be improved. It's going to be made more meaningful to people. There's a long way to go with it, like every piece of software that's ever been invented. The 0.0.1 is a long way away from finished. So let me try. I'm told you can see that now, yes? You say SpectraDOS version 0.0.1 and then an OK underneath it, yeah?
Yes.
Cool. So this is SpectraDOS. It's made intentionally to look weird. There's nothing you see on the screen that isn't intentional. You might see a slight staticky overlay, which is a texture that I've applied. And the reason for that staticky overlay is because it has the potential to create pareidolia and the ability and see figures in it occasionally. It's not doing anything for me at the moment, but it does very rarely create something really weird that you can see in the background. So nothing you see is unintentional. So if I just simply click OK, you'll notice that this is the only interaction I can have with the system. It should give me, so it's booting up. This is purely decoration. It's just going to go through a few startup things in which it's glitching already. The glitching is kind of, it's decoration, but it also kind of sets up the user to understand what's coming or what they can expect. It's a common game design kind of trope. And this also does a little bit of work because it is coming up with randomization algorithms in the background and generating numbers. And once we get to the end of this loading bar, we should just start typing, in theory, So, presence do secret. Okay, that's a pretty clear first line. So you'll see that it comes up with things that are quite easily to interpret. Drift amid decay. Presence do secret, drift amid decay. And it's quite interesting that these words are not, it's not just random nonsense, okay? So deep within SpectraDOS, there's some pretty complex algorithms that allow it to occasionally come up with words that make sense. But I need to underline that this is not AI. This is not artificial intelligence generating words. So these words are genuinely, problem get shadow. These words are genuinely random. There's no way that anybody, no AI or anything could ever predict what it's going to say. There's a lexicon that comes with it. So there's certain words that are not in its lexicon. That's one of the things that will get expanded as we go on. And the whole point of SpectraDOS is that you can sit and watch it. You could run it on your background, on your computer, and you can interpret it as you see fit. If you're in a site doing an investigation, you can just run it and see what comes through. If you are home in the dark, just run it. I do that quite often for hours and just look at what it's saying. Although I said home and it says home suffocate. And so these things seem to come through inside shadow, okay? Water glitch inside shadow, okay. So these things just seem to come through and seem to make sense, but I think it's probably not making sense. I think it's probably me interpreting it to make sense. Because as I'm talking to you, words are coming through that kind of seem to agree with what I'm saying. So, yeah, it's really quite interesting that we do interpret this. And this is also probably a form of pareidolia as well, that we see these things and we are able to interpret them to mean something that a psychologist would argue they don't. A psychologist would argue well they don't. As a sociologist, I would argue that they do because in sociology, everything has meaning, okay? Once we get to the bottom of this page, it will just, I believe, start scrolling up. No, it won't. It's just going to carry on and go off the screen. Yeah, it just carries on. Okay, so you see, this is another thing of this program. It's designed for me to not know what it's going to do. I thought that it would start deleting top lines, but no, it's going to carry on. So yeah, everything about this program is designed completely randomly, which in itself, although perhaps you might not be able to understand why, is quite an achievement to be able to make a program that behaves in a way that even the programmer does not expect. That is the very first stage of my particular philosophy of design, in that is that we should be able to program something that we don't fully understand. And SpectraDOS is kind of the first step towards that. It's kind of my first kind of gift to the world. Right, let's close that a moment. And I will try back my PowerPoint. There we go. Oh, wrong one. We'll just share it like that. That's not going to hurt anything, is it? So, yeah. So like I was saying, it's not random noise, although it may look to the casual observer like random noise. It's what's called structured uncertainty. There's a structure to it, but you're uncertain about how that structure takes shape. And the intent is that it's impossible to be certain about that structure takes shape. So a scientist, in theory, could not predict what is going to come out of the system next. It offers the user a kind of digital ritual. It gets you to be sat in front of a screen and allow you to completely immerse yourself in what SpectraDOS is doing, if you wish to. It allows you to look at that and interpret it for your own life or for your own particular situation. And the idea is it's the computer as a seance, okay? So the computer is the medium in this case. I imagine as SpectraDOS becomes more advanced and is adopted by people, perhaps mediums will be required to help interpret what comes out of it. That's a future technological mediumship, if you imagine. It's a move forward in the kind of world of mediumship in general. So this is the kind of point of what I've been trying to get to. Long and short of it is, are we looking then at a ghost? Is it a machine or is it us? Is it us interpreting I'm just going to my website so I can give you the link to actually download SpectraDOS. Are we simply interpreting what we want to see? And there is always that question in the world of any kind of spiritual practice, yeah? There's always that kind of, are we just seeing ghosts because we want to see ghosts? Are we just believing it? Are we just seeing aliens because we want to see aliens? There's always that question, and I don't necessarily think that is a bad question or that is a bad thing, even if that is the case. It helps us understand ourselves more deeply. So what I'd like to do is put this link. Well, I'll drop the link into the chat in a moment, and then you can all click on it. Maybe that'll be the best way to do things. So yeah, so I'd like to kind of hand over to you. This talk's taken a little less time than I was expecting, but that's fine. Gives us more time to talk about it. And I just really like to see what you guys think. Do you think that a computer can be haunted? Is it art or an experiment, or is it contact of some kind? And what messages, I suppose this is something I'm going to ask you to get back to me about. What messages did you hear when you used SpectraDOS, or just even when we just ran through then? Did you see anything of any use? So I'm going to stop sharing there. But what I am going to do is I'm going to go to the chat, and I'm going to put in the link to where you can download. And it's on my website, so it'll probably take you to itch.io afterwards, but it's just a link for you to go and download. And I think you guys have put that already. Kristian, sorry, thank you. Thanks for doing that. So yeah, questions.
Okay, yeah, wonderful. I mean, as a gamer myself and someone who wants to have haunted and strange experiences, or certainly experiences that feel personal, I think this offers an interesting opportunity to do that. Because I guess you are interpreting what it is that it's being presented to you. So when you mentioned earlier that it's a game that isn't necessarily experiences play, because I think we touched on this last time, is where is the kind of difference between an experience and a game? Because a game is essentially that you're touching it, you're playing, you're having an experience there. But are we watching this experience as almost like you would a show or a production? Have you designed it to watch it, and then you are interpreting what you feel from it or what you get from it? How would you explain why you created the interface the way that you did?
So SpectraDOS is what's called a zero-player game. There's a few examples of zero-player games, just games that you watch. I think I've never played one, but there's tapping games where you simply tap, and that's classed as a zero-player game. Or there's games that play themselves, and they're for you to watch. And SpectraDOS is similar to that, only I think it engages the user more than an interactive game, because you actually have to look and think and interpret what you're seeing to fit in with what's happening on the screen. If you don't take that time to interpret, then the game does nothing. It does just genuinely randomly create words. But if you are actively involved with what's going on the screen, it starts to make more sense to you. As I suppose the seer is the best way to explain what the person using the game is. It's an interactive on a much deeper level than just sitting there and playing the game, I think.
I like that you use the word seer there, because I guess you would have to be the interpreter, the one who's having the experience in order for it to be an experience that's making sense. Otherwise, you are just watching gibberish. What you are doing is you're interpreting via essentially your psychological state of mind, your point of reference. One of the questions that I did put in here is, when the game is running, is it pulling from the computer, or is it running in its own kind of space?
So the game has a lexicon of words, and it has a mathematical formula for how sometimes words get put together to make sense. And then it has a mathematical formula based on various, and I won't go too deeply into that because it's still something I'm working on, but it's based on various occult schools. So it uses those mathematical formulas together to make words randomly make sense. So it will use perhaps astronomy. It doesn't use astronomy, so I'll use astronomy as an example. It uses perhaps astrology as a way to generate the root for the number, and then it will use that as its random root. So that is the kind of outside world interacting with the game, but that's very minor. In fact, the game, after it's got that root number, works on its own, entirely disconnected from anything.
Okay, so I guess for some people who perhaps are going to run this in the background on the computer or watching it, I was kind of getting to, because I guess some people have a bit of an affinity for data. They're not quite sure what games do, particularly if they're not generally a game player. I mean, generally the people who watch the ASSAP webinars, the guys who are seriously strange, have an interesting age bracket. You know, generally it's 35 and upwards. Those who have perhaps might have played a Mega Drive or an Amiga or a Commodore back in the day, perhaps have never touched nothing since. But it's not really a game in the sense that you're talking about, is it? This is an experience.
This is more of an experience, and it does nothing. It does nothing to your data. It's disconnected from your data. It knows nothing about your computer. All that it knows is the mathematics and the randomness that's going on inside it, which on one level is coming from your computer, but there's no data involved in that. It's coming from your CPU. So it's completely safe and it's completely disconnected. You could run it on any system and get exactly the same response, really. Yeah,
I just wanted people to perhaps just be aware of that, so they actually will be more inclined to have a go with it. You know, because I
mean, don't worry about it. It's absolutely safe. From a computing point of view, there are those who would argue it's maybe spiritually questionable. And I have had a friend, I'm not going to mention his name, but quite an influential friend, say that it's dangerously putting a computer into a world that doesn't belong, a spiritual world. So maybe it is, maybe it isn't, but maybe that's where we need to go in the future. Yeah,
that's an interesting analogy. Taking the computer somewhere it's not supposed to go. It's making your computer haunted.
Yeah, that's the goal.
So actually, before I wrap up here, so the last time we had a conversation with you, you produced a presentation or a talk here called Ghosts of the Urban Weird. And then within that, you mentioned about what hauntology is. And I think that's really interesting. It'd be really good for those perhaps who are here that didn't hear that. Could you explain what hauntology is?
Yeah, so hauntology, sadly, hauntology has little to do with the paranormal. And it's a philosophy by people like Mark Fisher and Derrida, who decided that the thing that most sums up what hauntology is that the past will always haunt the present. So whatever happened to us in our past, we can always see happening in our present, but equally, the future will also haunt the present. So we don't live in one time. We live in three different times. We live in the past. So I come from, this is a really basic and really simplified analogy, but I come from a sports background where I dealt with communities of leisure. And so my work now has that little kind of leisure aspect. But also I'm going towards a spiritual kind of computing world, which is completely new and adventurous. So my work also has that. So what's going to happen in the future and what's happened in the past makes who I am today. And that's basically what hauntology is. And it works well with the paranormal and the concept of ghosts because, as I spoke about before, ghosts are kind of our heritage. So what's happened in our past, the ghosts that we see or understand, inform what we believe today. And the things that we'll probably discover in the future also inform what we believe today. Because if we don't think about the future, then we can't think about what we're doing, if that makes sense. So it's a really quite a complicated system which is really, really simple when you think about it. It makes perfect sense that everything that happened in the past, not just that happened to us, but literally everything that happened in our society in the past is influencing how we look to the world today. Does that make sense? Have I just completely confused everybody with that explanation?
I think you might have confused everyone, but at the same time, I think it does make a broad sense. You know, our present day is a kind of an image of every experience that we've had has brought us here
The
now.
past and the future is inside every single one of us, basically. And the past will always haunt the present. That is the one line that hauntologists believe. People like Fisher and that. So an interesting offshoot of that is like Mark Fisher, a very famous hauntologist who wrote several books before he tragically committed suicide after his final book. But his final book was about the weird and the eerie. And this is really quite relevant to paranormal research. So Fisher said that weird things are the presence of something that shouldn't be there. Is the presence of something that shouldn't be there. And eerie is the absence of something that should be there. So if you think of that in terms of, let's think of it in terms of a massive theatre that you're stood in. Eerie is the fact that there's all those seats with nobody there, and it makes it feel strange because there should be people there, right? Whereas weird is that one dark figure sat in the middle of the room who shouldn't be there in an empty room, right? So that is weird. But eerie is when that person goes and it's just empty. It's the expectation, the gap that's left for us to be scared. And if you think about that gap that's left for us to be scared, that's the gap that our ghosts and our beliefs and our spiritual world enters. And that's kind of how I see hauntology.
I actually really liked that interpretation, the eerie and the weird. I should certainly remember to use that in the future. I guess before we move on to the questions in a second, so can you talk about your Black Plaques project that you shared last time? For those who didn't...
yeah, I mean, there's not been a lot of progress, and I have been meaning to get in touch with ASSAP to see if we can do something. So the idea of the Black Plaques is that we would, very similar to the Blue Plaque approach of saying where important people were born or lived, they tend to get a blue plaque. I believe that plaques would be suitable for haunted locations that explain the hauntings that were once there, and those plaques could then be linked to digital resources that help people understand those hauntings, games that recreate those hauntings, or just spaces, digital spaces that people can go and experience. And that would keep the ghosts and the heritage that those ghosts encompass alive in those places. That's the plan. But like all things academic, these things have to be sold to somebody that's got either some money or some interest, not necessarily both. And then it can start to happen. And it needs to be, once I've got somebody on board, it then needs to be sold to the university to say, yes, we'll do that, we'll get involved. So it's a big project, but it's a project that I think is quite important.
So I think there is actually a lot of validity into that, because you're talking about, it's a cultural relevance. I think the most obvious one off the top of my head comes like Borley Rectory. It'd be great to have, a black plaque there that someone has a bit of information about, the fact that it exists there, and there's like a QR code, and you view the QR code, and then perhaps on your phone you can see a digital recreation of the rectory that used to be there, and some information about it, perhaps a 3D model, and you can perhaps look into it, and perhaps while you're in that 3D model, you can see some of the things that perhaps used to happen in that space.
Yeah. The goal is, with similar thing to SpectraDOS, is that rather than just give representations of those ghosts, is to somehow recreate those ghosts in digital space. I'm going to hasten to add that I've been working on this only for a year or so, and probably at least 3 lifetimes away from achieving that. But I get a little bit closer every day. But so yeah, you click on your QR code, and in some way, that ghost would actually be there. There would be a way to interact with it in a way that you would expect to interact with a ghost. That's what I kind of call spiritual mechanics, and it's the kind of thing that we need to try and understand, is how these things work. And there's a lot of work to do with how architecture works in that way, and how the weird and the eerie work in that way. And so once we can find a way to bring these things together into a digital world, then we can actually start to haunt computers in the literal sense.
My ask then of you, Andrew, is would you write a piece about the Black Plaques project, if we're going to call it that, so I can include it in the next issue of Seriously Strange and get our members who have a physical edition, a digital edition, to read about that and your proposition for that. And let's actually get the ball rolling on this, because I think it's something really culturally relevant about our past, our ghosts, our stories, and the places that we live and experience. I think there's something really powerful to this. I think we should get it out there and get more people involved with it.
Of course, yeah.
That sounds excellent. Caroline, I can see you're waiting there with bated breath in the background, having eaten your pack of skips. Would you come forward and join our conversation?
Seriously, I don't tell you secrets for you to go and blab them out. Okay, I'll turn my screen off so I can enjoy a bag of skips. I'm starving, what can I say? But Andrew, thank you very much for stepping up today. Just touching on something that you briefly said about the QR code. Are you aware that there's a bottle of wine that has a QR code that you can scan and it tells you about ghosts, famous characters in time?
That's really good. Is that? I've seen bottles of wine with kind of old photos on. Is that the brand?
It's a brand. Where have I seen them? Co-op has them. So on the front, it says a character wine, and there's a QR code, and you scan it, and then they come to life on your phone, and they tell you their story about their life.
That's wonderful. I'm going to have to look into that. I did not.
The problem is I don't drink the wine, so I can't tell you the name of it, but I can probably go into the co-op and find it and scan it.
Yeah, there's a co-op literally. If my window was open, you see the co-op. Yeah, it's right there, but I've never seen it, so that's weird. But okay, no, that's cool.
Other platforms that you can buy the wine are available. I have to say that for purposes of this when it goes onto YouTube.
Yes,
but yeah, so it's kind of like that idea. I think it's a really good interactive way, incredibly good for maintaining those famous areas and those sites that you have over time that do need to have a reminder, the same as the blue plaques. I totally agree. Sorry in case I've already had this question answered. What's your intentions with your software eventually? The growth, will it be like an intelligent learning where it learns itself and develops?
I don't want the software to become AI. That's the most important thing. And in this day and age, it's really difficult to say it's not AI, but the idea of the software is that it will become a digital Ouija board. That it will become a way to interpret on a screen that you would normally use other methods for. And the idea is that one day, perhaps psychic mediums, or perhaps there's even potential psychic mediums out there today that don't realise they have the built abilities that this software is going to open up for them. And so perhaps that's the goal for SpectraDOS. And really, I don't know.
So at the moment where it just churns out words, is it a little bit like an Ovilus where you're hoping that it can have some intelligent responses?
It's a little bit like that, yeah, I suppose. Yeah, and I suppose that was kind of one of my inspirations. But it doesn't exactly, I don't think it works in the same way. Now, I wouldn't know how those work because I haven't researched them. And the reason I haven't researched other things that do similar jobs to SpectraDOS is a really intentional approach to not wanting to be influenced to copy them, because I feel like this needs to be something separate and something new. So what SpectraDOS does is it uses various ancient systems to come up with a root number, and that's what computers use to generate random numbers, okay? So it uses various ancient systems to come up with a root number. It then uses that root number to generate a random number, and that random number is picked up from a lexicon of words that it has, and that lexicon of words is weighted to make occasional sentences that make sense. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does completely. And I'm aware that the SPR also have something which they call like a random generator number that they use in paranormal research. It may be worth speaking to Dr. Graham Kidd and seeing if he can give you some ideas how the interface might be similar or react the same. So it's Dr. Graham Kidd within the Spontaneous Cases Committee. He's the expert, I think, with the random number generator. So yeah. I don't know if that might help. Also, there's a chap watching here tonight. Shout out to the wonderful Andy Guy from Sire, SCIRE. He also has equipment that I swear by. It's not your random pap that you can buy. He's put a lot of thought into some of the stuff that he does. We use it in scientific investigations, looking at environment. And even though it randomly generates some of the words, they're used more to do with the environment. He's done a talk on it. He's explained it wonderfully if you want to go back and have a look at a
Yeah, I
previous
will
talk
do.
that he's done. But I think Andy might be able to step up and give you any advice to help to create and put into your own thing. Andy's probably sat there going, I'm far too busy, but please just reach out to him and you know, by all means, he's great source, great font of knowledge. But yeah, so let's move on to the questions that we have.